Welcome to Microcollege. This week on the podcast, we're very excited to have as our guest Jill Nephew, who is, in the wonder of our times, is a person that I first became aware of maybe a couple of months ago through a podcast, through the Emerge podcast, and then a couple weeks ago encountered in a meeting online with a group of other people, and now here we are talking. It's amazing that this is the time that we live in.
Yes.
Jill is speaking to us from the Bay Area, California. She's in the software world. She also has a background in physics and meteorology. And she's the founder of a public benefit corporation called Inqwire.io, which will allow her to explain in due time here. So thank you so much for joining us, Jill.
Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
So we're speaking to you today. This is being recorded on Halloween, 2023. If we think about the year of 2023, something that is frightening to many people here on Halloween has been, and inspiring and exciting, has been artificial intelligence. One of the reasons I was interested in speaking with Jill was some of her insights about AI and about software technology, and in particular, the ways that it is interacting with our sense-making capabilities, the ways of developing and interacting with ourselves and our world and with our fellow human beings, which seems an urgent topic for anyone interested in education and indeed in being a human being in these times. So really excited to have an opportunity to go deep with a person who's thinking deeply about this today.
Yeah, likewise. There's so much to say about the overlap with education, so I really welcome this opportunity to unpack that, as well as many other topics that we overlap in. Yeah.
So, Jill, you said you listened to a few of the podcasts, the Microcollege podcast episodes, so you'll know that we generally begin with people's biographies. So I want to invite you to think back to when you were 18, 19, 20 years old, sort of the age of most of the young people we're working with here at Thoreau College. And I wonder if you could share where you were, what you were doing, and what were the big influences on your developing sense of yourself during that time period.
Yeah, this is a great question, and it's kind of hits the crosshairs of my own personal overlap with what I hear people speaking to in all these movements. I think I'm a little bit of a poster child for a lot of the people that, had I known about some of these things, I probably, they didn't hit my radar, but I probably would have been seeking them out actively had I known at that age. So my background was very weird with school. I'm obviously a bit off in uneven in my capabilities. Like I skipped a grade and then I flunked out of everything, and then I went on a home study, and then I dropped out, did a bunch of labor jobs. I decided my mom thought it would be good for me to do a bunch of labor jobs. So I entered the workforce full-time at 15, was working part-time at 13, illegally, fake social security number. Anyway, so I, by the time I was 16, I was having leadership roles in the workplace. I was a line manager and a restaurant manager. By the time I was 17, 18. Meantime, in parallel universe, I tried community college at 16, flunked out, 2 Fs and everything, couldn't get myself to do it. And the conditions of my dropping out of high school as well were a bit messed up, because this is a kind of a failure of the busing program. So I was in a poor neighborhood, bussed into a college prep school neighborhood, or college prep neighborhood. And I didn't dress like the other kids, and I had migraines. And my teachers actually kind of merged those two together into kind of putting me in that mess up, that intentional screw up category. So even though I was the top performing person in my science classes, and I actually got locked out, kicked out of my classes when I had migraines for not focusing. And it was kind of surreal, actually. Like when I replay what those teachers said to me and did to me, I thought I was almost imagining it until I met other people that were in the classroom that later in community college that said, oh no, I was there. They really said those things. I was like, wow, that was really a huge fail of stereotype, even though I'm, not typically a demographic you would think would have stereotype problems. It was definitely a subcultural stereotype problem. So I was reluctant to leave, but I was kind of getting undermined at every turn. And my mom talked me into leaving, saying you just go to community college. So there I was. We haven't even hit 18 or 19 yet, but I was very interested in personal development even since a young age. I felt a strong drive to understand, you know, my father kind of answered all the big questions for me at a very young age, like maybe infant toddler even. I don't know how I did this, but I was pondering really deep questions about life and what I should be doing with life. And I kept waiting for this magical, you know, time when everyone's going to sit down and we're going to talk about the big stuff. Like, you got not much time here. What should we be doing? You know, and that wasn't happening. And I just couldn't understand why that wasn't happening. Like, it was just a recurring theme. So I was actively attending every church I could find, even though not, you know, I wasn't raised religious, but I was just trying to find where are these conversations happening? Where are people talking about this? And then I found myself at the spiritual section of the used bookstore and just consuming all the different world religions. And then I was in a kind of spiritual school, for lack of a better word, area in Northern California where there's all over the place. So I got to survey a bunch of them. And I ended up landing on a Gurdjieff school, a very gentle one. And that might be fun to kind of unpack for nerds on, you know, what is that developmental model? Because the way I understood that developmental model was that it was higher degrees of reason of which you're developing your conscience. So you're learning how to consider larger and larger spheres until eventually you feel in service. Somehow you feel so connected, you feel in true service to kind of this very abstract concept you have formulated through your development of what's kind of all in everything. And so it's kind of a self-study, you know, you're studying yourself, you're trying to learn from yourself, you're trying to learn from life quite actively. And that was kind of the,
are you using the Enneagram? I know that comes out of the Gurdjieff.
No, so one thing about the Gurdjieff work, so I'll give a little crash course for people. He came over, he was trying to kind of, maybe almost like a first new age thing, bring a lot of the esoteric ideas from the East, but tune them for Western audiences. So he was considered himself a living tradition where he's a living teacher. You know, it's something that was transmitted to him through being in contact with other people demonstrating things. So it's a little less voodoo, I think, than a lot of the transmission stuff. It's kind of like it's understood you're there to kind of study and observe somebody and catch them like in every moment. Like, how do they handle this scenario? How do they handle that scenario? So you're really like studying your teacher to see, who is this person? Is this someone I want to, do I really take them as an exemplar? And that was my idea. I really wanted to see, do I take these people as exemplars? And then the idea is to innovate, continue to innovate against your current culture to try to engage this kind of development. And he's very mysterious on what the end game is, but he actually, in some of what people consider his most kind of true writing, where he tries to keep things kind of obscure because he really wants people to question everything. He kind of alludes to ultimately it's about becoming a good Christian. That'd be your ultimate aim, which is being to truly learn how to love your neighbor, you know. So it's about this character development. And what would it, you obviously, you know, every time you have this kind of inability to love, that you take that on as a personal shortcoming of your, you know, a lack of understanding that you must not be seeing things quite right here, because, you know, this is not created to not be loved anyway. So yeah, it's an interesting interesting thing to study its own right, because people can be innovative. It brought in all the cult problems and all the cult leader problems, and it's got some of the worst transgressions, and it's often like people don't want to mention it because it got really wacky. Our school was incredibly lovely and tame and wonderful. So I have a lot of thoughts on cults, because our school was so known for being kind of calm and gentle and safe, that we got kind of a lot of refugees from that still wanted some sort of connection to the people that hold those intentions, but they were looking for a safe place to kind of dip in. So we had a lot of kind of friends of the school that would want to kind of show up every now and again and just feel like they still kind of had that, were around that vibe in a safe way. And then the fellows running it, the three kind of seniors in command, perhaps not surprisingly, one was a well-respected lawyer, even served as a judge locally. One was a PhD anthropologist at Cal, and the other one is a physics guy doing, you know, so they're all highly educated in traditional, you know, fields and working in traditional fields. And this was kind of an extension of kind of their public works in the world. And they did it very much like, not, you know, just, it was always a small group and not looking to grow outrageously, just kind of like a service to the community, and has grown into more and more of that, just like very open service to the community kind of presence, that same group. So so I think I'm really happy how I chose that. So that was I had really deep participation in that by the time I was 19, since that's the age. Found him at 18, was completely involved, deeply involved with that. And then at 19 is where I gave community college another shot with a 1.5 unit art class, which I could squeeze a B out of. That's how much school I could handle at 19. I just really didn't like being told what to do. I really didn't like homework. And the community college system allowed me to keep kind of poking at that. And then by the time I was 24, I had done a complete 180. I transferred to Santa Cruz, and we could talk about Santa Cruz because that's another interesting parallel there.
Yeah.
Chose Santa Cruz. I ended up studying physics, and because all these choices were really my own agency at each step, and by the time I was at Santa Cruz, I was maxing out my units. I was doing independent studies every semester. I graduated enough units for 2 bachelor's degrees, and a group of us even started an informal undergraduate colloquium where we chose topics that weren't represented at Santa Cruz. We could find a library, attempt to teach ourselves and teach each other for no credit. So I was a complete education nerd, but by the time I was 24, I was all in. And so that, and then as a lot of people know, graduate school, I picked 2 very small programs. So my cohort is like 7 or 8 people, which is also interesting to me. So like there's that's how a lot of graduate programs work. You get this really tiny cohort that you go through these years with. So yeah, and so I have a lot of reflections about which I'm sure hope we get into. I know we want to talk about AI and everything, but I found so many amazing cool things that lit up as I was doing this deep dive into your world and all the great episodes you recommend I listen to, and then Lean's work, learning more about Lean's work specifically.
Yeah.
So I'll stop there. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. I think in your bio, I don't often do this, but maybe there's something between the like one art class at community college to majoring in physics and university, right? There, it's like the old Gary Larson cartoon about where here a miracle occurred here, something important
Right.
happened.
Oh, there is a miracle occurred moment, actually. Yeah, that's great. Let's talk about that. I mean, I could talk about this stuff all day long. There's so many fun things because I've been really curious about education. I've had such it hasn't been there's nothing smooth about me in education. It's always been like peaks to valleys. So that there's the moment, there's 2 that happened around the same time. One was I was doing my lower division physics class and mechanics at community college. I thought I wanted to go into some kind of engineering. I didn't know it was physics yet. And we were studying the usual longitudinal and transverse waves, just like everyone does. And then we had this slinky to study longitudinal waves. And I just asked my teacher, well, what about I could do this with a slinky. I can make a slinky go up and down. What about studying longitudinal waves and, transverse waves simultaneously using springs? And she said, oh, I don't think anyone's tried to model that. And I'm like, what? This is the first time I heard that scientists didn't know everything. And then the next bait was like, well, you could try. So I did a little independent study, which, by the way, I should say also my community college, the way I had to get through it, coming from, I think, this other training and my own agency, was I had to strike deals with a lot of professors. Like I couldn't do multiple choice exams. My brain would turn off. I couldn't do rote thinking. And so, like, for instance, I had a history class and I knew history was gonna be the hard one for me. So instead of doing like a bunch of tiny papers, I asked if I could do one massive paper. So I read 800 pages of Aaron Burr's memoirs and read like a 20-page paper on Aaron Burr. Let me do something that gets me, that I feel, but I'll do a lot of work for you if you let me follow my own curiosity, basically. And at the community college, those professors let me do that, which was wonderful. Like I managed to find a way to light myself up, in all the general ed classes I had to take. And this is a really kind of snarky one, but to get through Psych 1A, I couldn't strike a deal. So I was taking critical thinking at the same time. And so I gave myself the task of cutting up my Psych 1A textbook and using it for every critical thinking homework assignment to find examples of bad thinking and pass the class in critical thinking as examples. So that's kind of how I had to find something where I was kind of a trouble child that way. But yeah, so I went off and I tried to solve the transverse longitudinal wave thing. And that's where I would go to my professor. I'm like, okay, what do I do here with the math? And she's like, oh, there is no math for that. I'm like, what? So it was like, oh, I somehow at my community college found the bleeding edge of math and physics. And often you have to go much deeper into an education before you realize that there is an edge to what we know and appreciate what it looks like, the excitement of looking over that chasm. And that's what I didn't know. I'd fall in love with physics. So the other magical moment was waiting for my my appointment with my career counselor at the community college. And they have these back then these turnstiles with like the transfer what classes you have to take for different majors. And so I was just spinning that thing around. I think I had a head cold and I'm just like kind of delirious. I'm spinning that thing around, waiting, and it's late, and I'm looking, and the thing just stops and it spins. It's like really a roulette, and it just stops right in front of my eyes. And I just look first at the bold thing where it's like the prerequisites like physics, 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 math, math, math. And I'm like, what kind of engineering is this? And it's like, it's a physics major. And I'm like, okay, that's it. This is all I want to take is math and physics. Just do it, be a physics major. Because I had a very much a pragmatic barrier against just going for it. So I later found out that it's okay. You can have a little fun with your in college. You can study physics. So those two those two helped a lot. And then another thing was how I picked my community, how I picked my college, is that I did a visiting thing. And even without any ideology, or I think it speaks a lot to Don Murphy's idea of like where I really resonate. There's a ton of emergence. Like I'm sensing into something here, what I want for my education. And I studied one physics program, and a professor used the words like they were just a B student. And I thought, I don't want to go to any university that says that about students. Like I just had this aversion, and I went and visited Santa Cruz, and I only visited Santa Cruz because it was nearby where I grew up. I wasn't going to take it seriously. It wasn't a serious school. Then they gave me two pieces of information. One, they said they're at the top at the time. They might still be in undergraduate research. So there we go. I can do all my thinking for myself I want. And they had an open door policy where they said in the department, you can interrupt any professor anytime with any question. And that was their policy. Are you good? Okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so I was like, wow, that's amazing. And that ended up being true. That I had a wonderful experience at Santa Cruz. Not only that, I know this has come up too, but while I was there, they moved buildings. They eventually had to give up this building, but they moved buildings to a building that's specifically designed for teacher student interaction, Kerr Hall. And the administrators took it over because it's the best building and put it in this like hallway building. And when they moved to this Kerr Hall, the physicists fought to keep it. And I was with it. We all had a movement to try to keep this building. There was so much cross-germination of ideas because people were just hanging out in these public spaces. And literally one day, a professor comes by and says, do you have a minute? And he says, I just want to explain my ideas to somebody. He pulls me in his office and he just starts, and I can't follow any of it, but he's using me as like a sounding board as an undergrad. And I just thought, this is just thrilling. I'm trying to keep up here. And that was a really big deal. And then for people who don't know, at a good program, even at Santa Cruz, and like good by this criteria, where the professors are supported and being open. I actually did at one point, we marched through topics in physics in order so that you can kind of grasp one. It's very layered. And we got to one topic, and I went to my professor's office hour, and I said, this is wrong. This can't be right. And then you just get handed the chalk. You don't get like shut down. And then I worked my way through it, and I said, here's what I want to prove. Here's what I'm proving to you it's wrong. And then he said, yeah, we were going to cover that in a couple of weeks, so yeah, you're right. And Einstein recognized that too, because it turned out the guy who was saying was wrong is Einstein. He's like, yeah, Einstein knew he was wrong too. That's why in 2 weeks we're going to learn about this next thing he figured out. So you kind of get this interesting way to kind of play along and and rehearse and practice. Like, how did people that really come up with these ideas think through these ideas? Like there's a way I was able to squeak that out of a classical traditional education as well. So I feel like in a lot of ways I've been trying to kind of make myself get might be closer to a microcollege education without knowing they existed.
Well, thank you for sharing that background. I mean, I think a couple of things that stand out there that are related to all of our work here is, I can't tell you how many of the people that I've interviewed, especially those who are founders of new programs, or I think also probably people working in education tech kind of stuff as well, are people who in some way struggled with the conventional education system, right? They, Zach Stein, who I think you probably have met or talked to before, he introduced himself. Yeah, I was learning disability, and that's how I got into what I do, and thinking about that. And so that makes sense. There's an impetus there to innovation and to for people who understand in ways that systems don't work for whatever reason. But also what stands out are these relationships and the just the individual people who stepped out of their formal role and had that conversation, pulled you out. That was a great story. You know,
Yeah.
and that you can also see that the design of the space was important for that too, in the building. So
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah. So there's a lot of resonant points there. I get what you're going for here.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I think when I first became aware of you and your work, this was this podcast interview on the Emerge podcast with the very striking headline of, interacting with the AI, using AI, talking to AI is like eating plastic, right?
Right.
Which was really a vivid image. And so as I've dug into your work, I think the other word, the kind of the top level phrase in your writing and in the description of Inqwire is this concept of natural intelligence, right?
Mhm.
And which is sort of obvious. If we were talking about artificial intelligence, there must be something which is natural intelligence. But and I think that I really appreciate going through and learning what your perspective on what that might be. So maybe that's a place to start. If before we
Sure.
get into artificial intelligence, what is natural intelligence?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think a lot of us struggle with how to kind of name this thing we sense into. And so I'll start with that kind of disclaimers. Like we're always struggling to try to name things. So why did we pick this concept to run with? There's a lot of concepts that have cycled through our work. Inquiry, obviously, it's in the name. Reflection, and sense making, right? It's a very big one. Natural intelligence was a really important concept, I thought, and I really wanted to kind of put it out there because I thought it was perhaps, hopefully, the most durable to being misconstrued, because it had already a place in AI research, which is basically it's a kind of operational term. It's that like every living thing somehow is a cognitive agent and somehow figures out how to negotiate its existence in its environment. That's like it has to negotiate its interactions with everything around it. It needs to niche, it needs to feed itself, it needs to reproduce, it needs to adapt, it needs to basically you know have some model of reality that works for it. And all those cognitive tasks it does, it is, natural intelligence is what. And so if you want to test if something has natural intelligence, you unplug it forever and you drop it into the world and you say, go. And then you can check back. And if it's still going, after some time. So you can see already there's some problems, right? Yeah, there's some
Yeah.
problems there. Like already you have a problem of like, well, wait a minute, you can't just drop something in and how does it suddenly get all that function when it didn't co-evolve or
Yeah.
so there's this history problem, there's this interface problem. So it speaks to something really special, and every AI researcher knows it's so impossible and impossibly hard they don't even know where to begin to do it. So that's one reason I think it's really important. And then if you start asking what comes with that package, what comes with those capabilities, then you hit some mathematical proofs really that you can't make machines do what we do. It's not a machine-like thing that natural intelligence does.
Yeah. What's striking, that's such a graphic and like just a great way to describe your idea, and just dropping something into an environment. I think one of the things that I experience in our programs here, and the students who come to Thoreau College and who our programs are often in some way sensing that they are missing some important piece of their education that maybe they can't really put their finger on. But this, what you're describing is, I think, a lot of it. Could I be set down in the woods, or indeed in adult life, right? In an independent living situation, in a job, in a family, with children, with a spouse, but especially in the natural world. Could I feed myself? Could I start a fire? That very concrete level of living in the world. And the answer is, at least initially, no, right? They haven't had
Yeah.
enough context, enough kind of interactions with the world, with the natural environment to do that. And so I definitely think of that, what you're describing there is certainly part of what we are trying to do here.
Yeah, we touched on that in that same podcast episode, I think, with Daniel Thorson on Emerge, where we talked about, I think that's why we both got emotional, was that it so felt to us, that truth that having a sense of that, like, I belong and I have a place on the planet, that people don't have that, that's just so fundamentally wrong. Like, you can call it whatever you want. You can talk about the matrix of the machine or liberation or all these things, all these abstractions, but you can just feel like this is our home, and yet it doesn't feel like our home. And so somehow, we got estranged from that sense. Yeah. And I think that's how, right, that is a way it comes up, that we're, you know, and for many of us with the collapsing social structure, that we're also just kept by kind of machinery. We're kept alive almost by machinery. We're kept alive in
Right.
distribution networks and food, and and people fix our houses and they set up these little environments and we just kind of exist in them. And so we don't even have like the social network that's keeping us going. It's like my friend from another culture, his point is like, he says it's really black and white in America. It really is like, if that system fails you, you kind of have nothing. And I think that in other parts of the world that are closer to having a sense of place, there isn't that sense that that's possible. There's not like this single point of failure
Yeah.
on our own existence. Yeah.
And there's definitely a lot of anxiety around that. And I think,
Yeah.
I think one of the COVID pandemic and the other disruptions in our world the last few years have brought that anxiety closer to the surface, where people are aware of how close to the edge we are all, but also each individual person is, and I certainly saw interest in some of our programs, the folk school programs, where people are learning how to, grow their own food and build their buildings and things like that. There was an uptick in that moment, as people that was brought to their to consciousness of like, what I'm not actually able to function if this apparatus kind of breaks down.
Right. Yeah. And so this is a lot of I guess I'm circling back to the eating plastic part. Well, maybe we're not quite ready to get back there yet, but yeah, that there's a kind of there's a style of thinking that's consistent with interfacing with this kind of mechanized, what keeps us alive. And then there's a type of thinking that we need that can be blocked, that is intrinsic to us, that we'd want to restore or ignite, that we may not be in the habit of using, that brings us into being able to do that apply our natural intelligence, do what I call real sense making, into a given circumstance. And so the Inqwire project was kind of a recognition that that there was something to do there to restore. Like, there was a restorative move that kind of had to happen, because these things become kind of we have a lot of faith in them working. Like, we have a lot of faith that way that we think to interface with modernity, that's for surehand, works for all these other things. And you can kind of see, once you see it, you can't unsee it, like how we keep applying the same kind of broken thing, and that there are real ways to kind of show people systematically, and that's a big one, systematically, how to kind of do new moves. It's almost like if you took somebody who was in a box and their body never moved, and they didn't even know they had joints in certain places, you would say it's going to be systematic for me to like have you move through these different range of motion exercises so you can just feel what that's like. So it just turned out that way, that basically kind of the ways of moving, the ways of looking, to kind of restore that way and to be able to be systematized. So I thought that was really important. And so everything in Inqwire kind of has that in its kernel. And then there's lots of ways we kind of enable people to do that alone with others in a different context.
Yeah. So I think a key concept that I've seen in your work, there's a feedback loop, right? This idea of certain content, certain cultural content being consumed is, it builds on itself. That's you're getting more artificial, the more iterations that are happening. And I think one of the things I appreciate also is the time that you take in your work to talk historically, right? This is an issue that precedes AI, it precedes the computer, it precedes the 20th century. It is baked into modernity in a way that seems like it's accelerating. Like, talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. Here's my disclaimer. I'm like the first thing from a historian, which you kind of established earlier. So it's kind of, I try to represent history, and I think all the historians are probably just shaking their heads, and all the philosophers also will be shaking their heads if I try to touch on philosophy, but it must be done. So as I understand it, basically reading on if people want to read into this history, if you read up on Giordano Bruno and the art of truth and what was happening in the late 1500s and what was going on with all these thinkers that to me were trying to unlock a lot of what I think Inquire's been working on. It to me, they're trying to look for a universal calculus of reason because there are hints of these things existing, which are a very similar way of doing this kind of counterfactual reasoning. Basically, they ended up building contraptions for counterfactual reasoning that would do unsuspecting collisions that overcome the natural associations you have, and that's kind of the engine of insight. That was a lot compressed into a short thing, but that's
Yes.
I'm gonna ride right over that for a minute.
I'm going to bookmark that because I want to.
Okay, we can bookmark that.
It seems like a really interesting and important concept.
It's an important concept. So yeah, so basically these things are widespread, and in the book, The Art of Memory by Francis Yates, if you'll want to, that'd be a fun, great book to read. That's a lot of, that's kind of the baseline historical text I'll be pulling from, and then I did some deep dives. But the way that she construes that history, her hypothesis is that this actual movement was happening, is deeply underground and responsible for like a lot of the Enlightenment ideas, like a lot of the the revolutions we saw in culture, or basically just opening up imagination, which is exactly what you'd expect to happen with counterfactual reasoning, right? So what happened, is that these things started becoming systematically, forbidden and destroyed and rooted out, and everything went underground, and everything was encoded, and people were trying to hide they were using them, and the church was coming after them, and then science started coming after them, and there's a book I read called Western Esotericism: A Guide for the Perplexed. The author is escaping me, but I'm sure that there's only one book by that title. And that also is a really lovely, coming from a non-historian, historical account for me of what was kind of happening then, that crosses over, where he's talking about there really were these moments where just one or two minds shaped all of culture. So around this time, the idea is that you can see the transcripts in the Giordano Bruno accounting, where they literally were saying, when he's kind of on trial, of like, why would you bother with counterfactual things that are imaginary, which is madness, when you have everything you need from real data? So it was really this logical positivism faith that we're still in. We're still so data forward, it's maddening. And so you see it everywhere. People cannot think from first principles. They're sure that we'll only know when we have the data, and that can be, as leading data scientist Judea Pearl, Book of Why, another great book, speaks to readily. You wouldn't only go to data if you haven't already figured out how something works. You don't need to measure the gravitational constant every time you use your bathroom scale. We know how gravity works, and we use that all the time to switch our weight to our mass. We don't measure our mass. So all over the place. Engineering wouldn't work if this were the case, right? So we have these physics, basically when everyone says science, it works, they're basically talking about this. There's a subset of what we know that we could apply without data. And yet we still live in this world that is kind of plagued by this kind of like, if you reveal one of these principles in any field, you're still often, especially in soft sciences, in an endless uphill battle to try to lead with that. So anyway, there was this historical movement, logical positivism, the Enlightenment that we're still in, and data's king. And then of course we can kind of see the extension of this now, where there's a faith, or a blind faith idea that seems to be held by even our president right now, that all this promise of AI is fundamentally resting on the idea that if we had all the data, we'd have all the reasoning. And we know that's simply not true. Judea Pearl, Book of Why, and many other sources. That's just the best one. I want to make it clear to people, like, there's many people have pointed this out over the years. Judea Pearl is just the latest, greatest version of this. But there are many ways we know that you cannot get novel ideas or new ideas, or you can't bound all everything's contextual. Data is not contextual. So this is kind of maybe setting us up, starting to set us up full circle to why it's like eating plastic. We're kind of not quite there yet, but that's an important pillar, which is that you cannot expect these things to do what human mind can do, and yet we're living in a time when that's almost just like considered a given, that all we need to do is wait for Chat GPT 7 or 8 and it's going to be there.
Yeah.
is all the data, right? Yeah.
So much packed into what you said there.
I know. Sorry.
And that really very interesting stuff. And I guess maybe if I could just restate a couple of things just for listeners
Yeah.
again. I mean, so you referenced Francis Yates, who, for people who haven't heard that name before, Francis Yates is one of the key historians of the role of the esoteric and the occult in the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, right? And people might be familiar with Isaac Newton, for example, who did a lot of alchemy in addition to, maybe more of that than physics, and didn't distinguish between those. My favorite example though would be Kepler, right? And Johannes Kepler was of course really the person who figured out the motions of the solar system, elliptical orbits, and all kinds of really counterintuitive kind of laws that turn out to be true and very useful. He's also an astrologer, court astrologer, but also if you read his works, he's constantly doing this counterfactual imagination, right? He,
Right.
in some case, like wrote the first kind of science fiction book, arguably, right? Which was about what would it like to be on the moon, basically. What would it look like? It's called Somnium, a dream of a person on the moon. What would the solar system look like? What would astrology look like from the perspective of the moon, right? And so that ability to do that imaginative work is essential to discovery and for this sense making, right? What if, that big question, what if?
Right. And there's also another book, Adam, I have to look this one up. Maybe I can give it to you later. I'm blanking on it, but it's a physics book by a physicist talking about kind of the state, what's going on in physics. And are you going to be, I guess you can edit this out. Is this, I could pause and find it. Okay, I don't need to do that. Do you
Sure, we can look it up. We'll put it in the notes. Yep.
Okay, we'll put it in the notes. Okay.
Yep.
So Adam's the first name, and I'm blanking on everything else. So basically, he's pointing out that these imaginative exercises by another name are thought experiments, which people probably have heard, and kind of documenting how the thought experiment has kind of been rewritten historically as not being kind of how people came to things. Like there's like a retelling of Newton measured, and he did these and he measured things, and then he showed gravity. It's like no, that was a thought experiment. And how many, Einstein, we were famous, right? His thought experiments and Gedanken experiments. So it's a celebration of those. And even though we celebrate them in some contexts, it's a little bit of this dissonance, right? We're still in where we're not understanding the power of these thought experiments because, and this is the way we think, which is the Falconer and Turner hypothesis on conceptual blending, because what natural intelligence can do, what we can do, which is not algorithmic, it's there's no way to write algorithms to do this that we know of right now, is to reliably blend together all these things in a way that we can have durable insights. Like we have to do it, if you think about it, to live into the next moment. Like we are not experiencing what's really happening. We're experiencing a model of what's happening that's continuous with what happened, and it's generally right. Like we don't go, "Oops, that was wrong. Oops, that was wrong." So we're using, every new moment's fresh and new, and it's all reconstrued based on our past lived experience. That is an incredibly intense and advanced capability we have, and it seems almost infinite. And we can talk about, that's a very nerdy conversation we probably won't have. But yeah, that capability is very much tied to natural intelligence, and with this blind spot we have, and this is what we spend a lot of time trying to educate people on, of elevating this data first, data's king model, where we're absolutely handicapping ourselves from enabling these higher level capacities. They all got kind of framed as unreliable. That's another historic thing that happened, was the Nisbet and Wilson 1977 seminal work was kind of wrong about strangers to ourselves and cognitive biases, where that whole movement of how we can't know our unconscious and it's kind of a mess in there and we're just these black boxes. That all has been re-examined, and it's deeply problematic, and it appears to be, just not true. Those were a lot of problems in experimental setups and the way people are approaching the topic. So, which might eventually get us to eating plastic. But basically, the researchers were inducing the problem in cognition they were measuring as they thought was intrinsic. They were inducing confabulation. They were inducing people making wrong causal utterances, and then taking them as being reflective of what was going on cognitively. There's a lot of moving parts between what someone says and what you did in the experiment, and how much that's a reflection of what's happening in them, and how much you brought into their cognition. teasing all that apart is not done very well right now in the psychological social sciences. So if you do that very carefully, you realize that what's more likely an explanation in all those things that people are inducing people to say things that don't make sense because they've narrowed their possibilities down. So to take a concrete example from that original paper, there's this famous experiment called the nylon experiment, where they took these 4 pairs of ladies' stockings, nylons, and put them in a quadrant in a little table. And then women walked by and said, and they're all identical. And they said, which one do you like and why? And so the women come by and they always pick the bottom right corner, and then they come up with some nonsense answer of why. And so they said, there, you don't even know you made up BS. You're a stranger to that. You didn't even realize you're using this nonsense algorithm. You're picking the bottom right quadrant and they're all identical. And you can't even know, you don't even notice that you're just making stuff up. We're just walking around these madness machines. So that experiment was redone. And they said, can you explain your answer? And they said, and the answers were of this kind, where the woman would say, well, clearly they're all the same and I didn't want to embarrass you. And so I just made up an answer, so, like, so this whole problem of like, you need to ask an open question. So if you start narrowing the possibility space down, you can induce people to kind of follow these tracks. And then if you do that enough, they'll start to construe a world out of what they just said and what you had them think. And now you're in the world of mind control. You're in the world of cults. You're in the world of false memories. You're in the world of false confessions, which are very reliable right now, by the way. They can, get people to confess. 95%, I think, of people will confess to a crime they didn't commit if you use these linguistic terms and these ways of phrasing things. And this should all start to sound now starting to get resonant with, we are knowingly interacting with imitation humans that their hallmark is that they confabulate.
Yeah. I think you start to see people already interacting deeply with these technologies. They're outsourcing this confabulation. They're like, well, ChatGPT, what does the world look like from the moon? Or like, what if this was the case? And then they get this pat kind of answer, right? Which is generated from these algorithms, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how is that different from a conversation, let's say, with a teacher or with or your kind of inquiry with the phenomena of the world?
Right. So, I mean, I think that I think it comes right down to what great therapists and great teachers and great, everybody, meditation teachers kind of all know, which is that as you mature, and great coaches, I've heard quotes on all these domains, that as you progress through your journey of getting better and better, you get better and better at inquiry. You get better and better at recognizing that you're not there to give answers. You're there to set up the kind of cognitive, setting up a good inquiry is not a simple thing. People think they're really undervalued. It's not just a question, right? You are trying to pull in different things. You're trying to sense where the student's at. You're trying to whatever the other person you're acting with. You have to model their world. You have to model kind of the deficit. You have to model where they're getting to, and you have to like carefully figure out how to pull things in that they can see that are introspectively available. Because of that introspective availability, this is Thomas Metzinger's work. You can't have the engine of insight. People have insight, they see. So it's not a thinking process. So a good teacher will know how to like bring those things in. And just in the act of bringing the thing in, that might be, that will just start coming together like a puzzle. Like the brain's designed to puzzle it all together, right? It's like, look there. I see where I am now, right? I don't know where I am. Well, do you recognize that clock? Oh, this is so, right. Yeah. So you don't have to necessarily, you don't want to give the answer. And so it's that art of putting those questions together. And then, so so if somebody is pre-construing an answer for you, you could just look at what is that what's happening in a mind of somebody who is just reading a pre-construed answer. It's nothing there is an insight process, right? All it could be is a memorization process. All it can be is authoritative. And the problem, as probably people can appreciate, is that what an insight process allows us to do is this miracle of how we can learn more and more and more in the world and somehow get faster and faster and faster. Like as we became domain experts, we become more fluid, more quick, and we can make finer distinctions. That is a paradox that our minds can do that. And it's a big mystery, of how memory can do that, because a computer will just get all clogged up. And in theory, we should too. So if we have two conceptualizations that are close, but not exactly the same, there's this washout. That's how we get the tip of the tongue, or we can't bring something. Adam Becker. Anyway, that was the author. I'm
Got
sure
it.
from there people can find it. So, tip of the tongue, just like that. Something washes out, you can't recall it. And so in theory, as you take and learn more and more, every domain expert should just be constantly have tip of the tongue. They should just be like unable to articulate. And yet that's not the case. They become more eloquent, they become more quick, they become more compressed. So that whole capability we have to do that requires some magical insight. So our hypothesis insight process really is a remodeling of the world in a simpler, cleaner, more reused form. Like all those previous models adjust slightly, and they accommodate your new information while still accommodating your old information. And somehow you're revealing a model that has more, your own model of whatever that domain looks like, that has more utility, more applicability. And this is the work of Wolfgang Klemesch, very under-referenced work. But the idea then of how we get quicker is that if you have a model you're using all over the place, in order to bring things to mind by association, the more places you use a model, the more quickly, all you need to do is find one association. So the more you learn, you get more associations. And as soon as you have one, you can grab the thing you're looking for. And that's what makes you more quick and fluid, is that reusability. So if you're just taking an output of a data model, that's just one construal that's, not integrated, not in your language, in your abstractions, where you've wrestled with that insight process of turning that into what, integrating it with what you already know somehow, that's just hanging out there, and that's going to grow, exponential. That's not going to compress. That's just going to become muddy, and you're going to get slower and slower. So, so in terms of just, I'd love to kind of see the end result quality of having somebody just tell you answers versus like finding ways to have you come to them on your own.
Yeah, well, I think we can get the answer to that by looking at much of education right now, right? A lot of answers. I mean, my formation as a teacher, a big part of it was as a Waldorf teacher in the Waldorf schools, and especially at the high school level. One of the key things was learning how not to answer the questions, I would say, right? I felt like, especially feel really at the top of my game as a teacher when I'm able to not answer the question and instead to say, show, of course, but also like if a student is going out of the class with a bigger mystery than they went into it, that's a great victory, right? Because that's what leads you on to more exploration and curiosity and excitement. Yeah. If it's all answered, right, then it's done and dead, right? And that there's a lot of education is dead, as we know.
Right. Yeah. And I think this is so if we kind of want to cross cut a bit, well, I don't know if I'm taking off track here, but I have a direction I could go with this right now.
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, this kind of gets into the politics of education to me. And I know that Lene Anderson in her book Bildung, which I recently read, which was wonderful as expected, pointed out something I didn't know, which is another history tidbit of that the counter argument to Bildung is what happened with the Nazis, and how can you explain that? And her counter to that is that they made it you couldn't ask questions, and they removed Q&As, and there's no questioning. I was also aware of another source, I don't remember, was talking about Eastern Bloc countries during the Soviet kind of overtake of that. They removed, burned, destroyed all books on reflection. So so there's very much this idea of, thinking for yourself and of course we know what happened with everybody who worked on the art of truth, which was the fun history of that is that the first version, 1300s, Raymond Lull, is by some considered the father of information technology, and he did this counterfactual thing out of concentric paper rings and he said with these things, he's a theologian, and he said with this contraption you should be able, anyone would be capable of proving for themselves, revealing for themselves like every theological truism, basically, like everyone can do this for themselves. And he went and he said not only that, they would realize God is good. And so he went on a little mission to try to persuade the Muslims that God is good, and got himself stoned to death. And then, of course, Giordano Bruno got himself killed trying to persuade the King of Spain to use this instead of his advisors. Instead of your advisors, you can just think for yourself. So it was this undertaking of getting people to think for yourself. think for themselves has been explicitly, you know, recognized as a threat multiple
Absolutely.
times throughout history.
Hmm. Yeah, it rocks the boat for sure. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, yeah, so I think this sets up, you've identified, and really immersed yourself in these big trends and these problems that are emerging in our whole civilization around education and around thinking and around our technology. And so I'm wondering if you could introduce us to Inqwire, and what is the vision for this, and what what should people understand it is that it does?
Yeah, so Inquires is still in the process of putting more offerings out there. So this is a little bit of kind of our roadmap of, depending on when people hear this, this might be stuff to come. It may not be there yet if you go to the site. But the general idea with Inquire is that, let me see, how should I tell this little story? Well, first off, maybe this is actually also relevant. This speaks a little bit, I think, uh, to the idea of emergence that was mentioned with sorry, I'm blanking, Don Murphy's episode with you. About I really liked what she said about this idea that people have been feeling this missing thing. And so we talked about 19, and now I actually want to jump forward to after, I was still missing something. Like I was getting something, and I don't know if I'll have time to get into this, but like I think the spiritual context is problematic. And this actually is something that I really resonated with Lean's work, and now see, of course, in our work too, which I'll speak in a minute. Lean talks about this idea of a Bildung rose. And I think she makes a really nice argument in the book Bildung about as a concept how this thing kind of stops the extremes, because each kind of checks, there's a tension, it's like a tensegrity to it, that they check each other. And we really see that in our work too. So so this idea of doing a kind of character development only under the umbrella of, say, a wisdom tradition, I think that's what the umbrella people are using now, wisdom tradition, often has problems because it's kind of too lopsided in my mind in the, in that one dimension. Um, and um, and particularly because so much of it's done kind of in a monastic or a removed setting where it's not trying to be truly representative of community. So it's trying to do two things at once. It has a very important role to allow refuge for people to do solitary work. But then I think that gets a little bit mixed up, and I know people work on this, but like the idea of how do we get back to the community? I know that's kind of a problem in general, right? How do you kind of get back to the community? So that was where I was coming from. And at my early 30s, I felt pretty adrift for a number of reasons. I think just enculturation in general. It was just like culture was getting to me. And I just felt this kind of, I couldn't find my place, right? Even though I was doing all this work, trying so hard, I also felt like I couldn't find my place as a young person. And my grandfather remarried. His new wife invited me to this group. She was in her late 70s at the time, of ladies that had been meeting for 15 years for this weekend retreat run by a 94-year-old Quaker. And I was the first person to be invited who's under probably 65. I was 30 at the time, 32. The first one, I went for a few years. And this Quaker ran this format that was very pure in just having people speak about their direct experience, even though it's kind of the intention was to kind of heal, when you're trying to heal, a bunch of people are like lifelong therapists that have been through everything imaginable, and that are some of them in their 90s, it's a very different mindset than this kind of, and I was still not like, go sort out your head, fix yourself, get on with things. And instead there's this kind of sharing with this, of the existential givens, basically, in a really non-presumptive environment without any fixing agenda. And I saw what my brain was doing. And I described like water. This is like, I am parched for, this is 100% what I need, unadulterated. This is what's missing, is that I need context. I need real stories from real people that have been through real life, that are giving to me straight without an agenda. I just need to hear, I need to fill up myself with those stories. It was like, this is reality. I need reality. I need to ground into this. And I was getting so much benefit, and I could just see it. I was just like, it was like a potluck. My little growing self was just gathering a little bit from this story, a little bit from that story, a little bit, and just an amazing support. Like, I had a rough childhood, and one of the ladies in the group had been in Auschwitz, which was a much rougher childhood. And she heard my story, which I was reluctant to share. I felt like I was being kind of whiny. And she said, look, it's going to take you 30 years of hard work to get over that, and you're not there yet. And but it's worth it. And no one had told me that, but her saying it to me directly after hearing my story was such a gift, because she had a world of credibility. I'm with her, she's with her friends, she's a wonderful person, a happy person, a trustworthy person. I knew her, she knew my, like that. I didn't need 10 years of therapy. I needed somebody that just became like this rock in me, and that's just the kind of extreme version of like lots of those happening that I didn't even need to be said to directly. I just needed to pick up on. So that was, but just that capability, I was like, wow, we need to get rid of the middleman here in a way. There's just like, it was so obvious that we have so much lived tacit knowledge, lived wisdom on this planet, and we are not wiring it up right. We're not bringing people together right around it. So the original idea of Inqwire was like, I want to just work on that problem. And for that, I need good questions to ask people, because I really realized that what I realized first, I just wanted to start these groups. But then I found out that there's a lot of social reasons why people, it's hard when you're older you don't want to necessarily extend your social network. And so through interviewing a lot of different older people, when I started Inqwire, I found out that they would be much more comfortable actually just with it kind of mediated. Like, I'll write it out and I can take gratitude, but I don't necessarily they wanted levels of mediation. Like, oh, that's a software problem, I can do that. Let me just interview with the software and let me just see if I can get that spread around, kind of thing. So that was the impetus to ask myself, and I guess this is where we're going to get into my background. My background is building really big giant systems and big models and AI systems, even not anymore, but I used to work on what would be called today explainable AI, which is not this dangerous kind. It's basically heuristics. So systems to help people work on complex problems. And so I kind of went whole hog on this of let me try to figure out what makes the right kind of question to try to draw that out of people, their lived experience. So the core of Inqwire really was a multi-year curation and exploration, experimentation, and a lot of just collecting of a certain quality of questions, testing, refining these questions and inquiries, and then seeing that they weren't an infinite set. There's a shape to them emerging, and that it was a manageable set. And so the core of Inqwire is simply this kind of templated inventory, about 1,000 forms, it turns out, but it's manageable, and ways of breaking down how to ask a kind of question that elicits that lived experience without being presumptive. And it turns out it's just kind of hard to not insert the closedness. To keep a question open is a skill, and this just lowers the barrier on that. So basically, however you use Inqwire, and we help people with this a lot, whether you're doing it alone, with others, groups, as educators, it's almost like a way to build out, it is a way to build out around any topic, kind of help you access those forms. And then further, I really wanted to get at the core of what that group dynamic was with the Quaker, because the other part of the story is that she stopped coming out to run the groups. She was flown out from Massachusetts to LA to run these groups. And she actually remarried, which is really sweet. So she wanted to spend the remaining years back in Massachusetts. And the ladies in the group, who many of them were lifelong therapists, brought all these different techniques to bear on the group. And it was kind of everyone's welcome to try out things. And so I had the same group of incredible women that had met for 15 years trying these different techniques, and it completely broke down and fell apart. It was really sad. But I realized, oh, we needed her format. It wasn't the people, it was the format. I mean, it's probably both, but the format's special. So I really worked really hard to try to capture what I thought those missing pieces were and articulate that into software. Software also generates a group mode that invokes and gives instructions to people that anyone, even a child, could run a similar format that should bring out that same space, that kind of holds space for that to happen. So it's kind of a tandem thing. And so far, mainly we've made the tools available for people to use just solitaire on their own, because there's, by definition, if you're doing solitude work, you know, this,
Yeah.
it's yeah, it could be an open companion for people that want to do solitude work without being presumptive. And a lot of people need that. So we really kind of want to do that first, but we're just now starting to, we'll, over the following weeks and months, we'll be releasing more and more for group and specific applications, including education, which I'm sure we'll be sharing with you and be happy to talk about.
Yeah. So if I'm tracking, just to restate, what I understand is that the core of what you're offering, what you're sharing with the world are basically a set of open-ended questions, right? These are prompts to inquiry, right? As you've stated it,
Yeah.
to be used
A
in
little bit
different
more of a
contexts.
question. Like you could think of it like a, you could think of it more, the question's part of it, but in order to get people to that place, um, yeah, so actually this is interesting. Someone asked me recently for my definition of inquiry, and I thought, oh, that is actually a good question because we have, it's a very specific idea now what this is. So, you know, it's kind of like what we touched on earlier is as a teacher, you need to do certain things to, you know, get people to that place where they can have an insight. And it turns out that there was a lot we could do engineering wise to, it's almost like language engine, very much language engineering, very careful choice of words to try to do that ideally. So it's kind of like getting people in the mood and setting them up and creating space and then certain hints and suggestions and pulling in. And so there's a lot more to it than just kind of the question. And that's really the more of the value add as well, is that's what we continue to test and iterate on, improve on, as well as how well does that kind of create that opening so people are seeing instead of thinking.
Right. There's a process, the structuring
Yeah.
of interaction there. That's also part of it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I
And so
think,
it's a collection of those. Yeah.
yeah. So as I've shared your work, and also shared the link to Inqwire with a few people here, and we are here at Thoreau College. We're named after Henry David Thoreau, who famously simplified, right? And also what we were talking about earlier about the role, about the way that technology, has interacted with some of these breakdowns around sense making. One of the questions from several people was, wouldn't it better, shouldn't we be striving to not be on a screen at all? Should we try to
Right.
cut the cord? And I guess I wonder what your answer to that is. This a triage? Is this something that is, given where we are, is something that will be useful and helpful, or is this something that in an ideal future, or in a scenario that we'd want to build intentionally, that would have a tool like this in it?
Yeah, this is a great segue into, I think we might be able to touch on all of our top ticket items you want to cover.
Thanks.
Yeah. So this is a great segue into tech for good and tech for harm, I think, in general, is that I wouldn't make the cutoff screen. I would think about like what are we doing with computers? So if we think about computers as artificial memories, one thing they do is serve as artificial memory. That they extend. So if you read, again, The Art of Memory, Frances Yates, we are in the habit of extending our memory all over the place. And so she's arguing that like a lot of our systems we put on things, and even our architecture and our art, and we'd like to build these systems and neograms you mentioned earlier, like we like to build these things that maps, we are a creature that extends our cognition by putting stuff out, writing, right? Putting stuff out there. And so when you have a computer, you just have like a new way to do that. So that's more dynamic. And so like in the 1300s, they concentric paper rings. We actually did an experiment where we tried to make it concentric paper rings, and it's just melted people's brain. Like I don't think people can concentrate like that anymore, like this many years later. So we had to like scale it back. We actually tried to reproduce those cognitive experiments through the screen. And that was a like, oh God, no, people, we all had headaches after. So you have a technology for representing information different ways. And this is where I kind of get back to like, I think the best way to consume a weather forecast is through a screen. It's great if you can see the satellite image. I think everyone can kind of easily have their eye track. Here it's coming. There's that. There's the Doppler, and you can kind of just see everything that's going on, and you don't even need any math, and you don't need any, your brain can just do all that. So I think that so I think there's two parts to this question. So on the one hand, what we would love is that it'd be a perfect world, people kind of internalized. There's a lot of things to internalize from interacting with this system that people get to. I think it does tend to break people out of simple causal reductive thinking, because there's so much polyadic nature to when you start working with these inquiries, you start seeing how things work, and you start seeing how mind works, and you start recognizing things it starts disabusing you in a larger way of some habits of mind. I think it can disabuse you of like a lot of reductive thinking that's a huge source of pain and psychological distress. Including, illness. And so I think there's like a meta learning you get through working with it. And so once you're disabused of that, you've shed a lot of the necessity perhaps for something like this. But I think that, my co-founder who, I kind of put that out there, my co-founder who has used the system more than anyone on the planet and done it for years, still holds that even though he has these things committed to mind, it's still nice to have it's still something about someone else doing it. And I think it's a little bit of the, you playing something back in your head takes cognitive energy away from, it's kind of a two-part, it's like cutting your own hair, it takes two attention systems to recall what you want to ask yourself the thing, then respond to the answer you're asking yourself. And that lookup is kind of hard, especially for the open forms, because it's not the way memory normally works by association. So I think having inventory still has utility. I mean, in a perfect world, we wouldn't need them. So, but a whole lot of it is this undoing, untraining, just knowing that there's another way to look at it. And so, yeah, it's kind of like, in some ways we expect a giant bunch of the utility, the software maybe goes away, but this idea of first the accessibility of the question forms doesn't go away. And then the second part is that some real magic happens in terms of speed, which might be really useful in the decades to come if we start thinking this way, in that the question's one part, but if it's not presumptive, you have to do your own work to go find exemplars from your memory. And that you have to search associations. So you might miss some because we're just stuck there. If you just no association right now, there's no association. And also it takes a long time to do that search, and it's a lot of work. So that's another reason I think curating your own kind of model of meaning, or something you say, these are the important things I want to recall regardless of context. These are the global things I want to keep top of mind, especially values, principles, important relations. Like having that externalized can be a grounding thing, and it also can very rapidly lead to insights, because insights happen on millisecond scale. You'll just see the pattern recognition when you don't have to go recall all that can be very fast. So people can do very fast insight processes and sense making. And that's that acceleration part. There's probably no way around that. So the fallback would be to do all this in books. So if we did at one point print out a book just so we have it of all our forms, it's a 900-page book, just the templates. So you have to look them up, fill in the blank, and it still wouldn't be perfectly right. We still adjust some things, but it'd be mostly there. And then you have to have a separate model, and you have to look up your model, and you have to like kind of line it up, and that all could be done. But you'd be hauling around. Like we really were thinking like, okay, people are gonna have this many books if they want to do like a camp out. Are people going to do that, or are they going to really want their phone with an app? So what we're thinking we would, ideally do maybe is like to try to either give people tablets where it's the only thing installed in an environment, or allow an offline mode and kind of ensure they don't have internet or something like that. But the device is super handy for kind of facilitating all that. So we struggle with that, but there's definitely a lot you can do with a computer system that you can't do with books. Pragmatically and speed wise. So
yeah, that is a thought that occurred to me in thinking about this question that people were bringing was, what I understood that you're working on. I mean, books, great literature actually does this well, and that's and especially literature. I would say, fiction, right? If you're reading Dostoevsky, or you're reading Dickens, or you're reading Shakespeare, you're not getting a list of answers to questions, right? You are These are prompts to insight, right? And and even the Bible, people look for answers in the Bible, but actually, it is a whole set of thought experiments and instigations to what would you do in this situation, or what is right and wrong in this situation. I think that the richness that comes out of cultures that are grounded in these great stories are often in that way. They're not giving answers, they are giving actually openings in a way.
Yeah, and if you listen to people talk about inquiry, and like if you have an ear for it, they're always collecting these forms, right? So people have they have a list of go-tos, and I always had like a list of go-tos. Like I kind of stumble on something like, I really like to ask myself this question now, and you see that people do kind of just, they have to kind of clumsily curate and kind of remember and write down, or cheat sheets, or they tend to curate. And I think that the problem with that, which I talk about in if people are interested, there's a STOA series I did that goes into this in gory detail. It's a 4-part series, but what we call harm by omission. That if you're really trying to make sense of something, really painful. I mean, we generally want to make sense of things because your life's not working. So those usually go together anyway. So when you're really trying to make sense of things, if your go-tos fail you and your therapist fails you, and people aren't aware, as they don't seem to be, that there are like not only there are many more forms of inquiry, a lot of these things are processes that link them together. And if you start counting how many processes are possible, it's virtually infinite. If you're willing to keep going your own tree into linking these things together, because the answer to one inquiry opens up the next inquiry, and you're really more on this exploration, this journey to go get answers and follow your curiosity, which is trustworthy. This is what you really should be on. So if you're always following a process, therapeutic process like 1400, that's not surprising to us. There should be for a 5-step process, there should be like, I forget what it is, like 10 to the 17 or something. There should be like trillions for each person. That like the combinatorics of how many processes you could make up with these open forms is huge, astronomical. So, people try their go-to CBT or something, or some other process, and they're going to get the insights they're going to get, and they're kind of going to run with it. And from our perspective, there's so many other places you could look. And so if people stop or give up, which they do, to us, that's a real harm that we can address. And that's that moral push to try to at least make people aware of that and give them those tools for that subset of people that feel like they really need to make sense of something, and the tools they're getting aren't working for them. Like, it's a lot more work, because to do it yourself, it is hard to do it yourself, but you can do it yourself. You can just keep searching for that way of looking at it that gets that aha that you need to kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a beautiful word. And I'm blanking on it. I don't know. Anyway, come to terms. It's a synonym of come to terms with it. Our ability to come to terms with things is a wonderful thing. And that's what we really often need. It wouldn't necessarily, and that's another thing too, is that we get kind of this solution focused mind, and it's kind of almost back to the serenity prayer. We're looking for that kind of serenity of like, to be able to come to terms with whatever we need. That alone can be the source of peace, even if we can't relieve our material conditions.
Yeah. Wonderful, Jill. I think we're well over an hour now, and
yeah.
Yes, I think we could talk for a lot longer. There's a lot of things that your work touches on, but I want to thank you for coming onto the podcast, and maybe we can do it again sometime.
That sounds great. Thank you. And I really appreciate all the topics and the questions. And yeah, if you think people need another dose of the AI and plastics, I'm not sure if we really got to the heart of that. I'd be happy to kind of do a round 2 where we really get into the nitty-gritty of the topic of the year.
Right, maybe we'll do that.
Or anything really. Yeah.